The abandoned house on Hollow Road. Hollow Road was a quiet, forgotten corner of the small Midwestern town of Ridgewood. Everyone knew to stay away from the rotting Victorian house at its edge. For decades, it had loomed there like a corpse, its peeling paint and shattered windows giving it a haunted, almost predatory appearance. The stories about the house were as old as the town itself. People spoke of strange lights flickering in the windows, low murmurs at night, and the screams of a family heard on a stormy night in 1967. The family of father, mother, and their 3 children were never found. The only trace left behind was their untouched dinner table and a single candle burning in the window. Over the years, the house became the stuff of legend. Local teens dared each other to approach it, but few made it past the rusty gate. Those who did claimed to feel an overwhelming pressure, like unseen eyes watching, and fled in panic. Then came the night when a group of college students decided to test their courage. Jake, Emily, Max, and Sarah had grown tired of ghost stories and were convinced the tales were nothing more than small-town superstition. Armed with flashlights, they laughed off the warnings of a gas station attendant as they made their way to the house. The gate groaned loudly as they pushed it open, the sound echoing unnaturally in the still air. They joked to mask their unease, but as they stepped closer to the house, an eerie silence enveloped them. No crickets, no rustling, leave just an oppressive, dead stillness. Inside, the house was even worse. The air was heavy, carrying a smell of mildew and decay. The floorboards creaked under their weight, and the walls seemed to close in the further they ventured. They entered the living room, where they found the infamous dinner table. It was still set, as though the family had left only minutes before, but the plates were caked in decades of dust, and the silverware had tarnished to a dull black. Emily's voice broke the silence. Why is everything still here? Who would just leave it like this? No one answered. Jake shined his flashlight around, the beam catching faded wallpaper peeling off the walls. That's when they heard a faint, scratching sound. It seemed to come from within the walls themselves. Probably rats, Jake muttered, his voice shaking slightly. But the scratching grew louder, more insistent. Sarah turned toward the staircase and froze. "Guys," she whispered, her voice trembling. At the top of the stairs stood a shadowy figure. Its form was indistinct, but its head tilted unnaturally, as if it were studying them. "Who's there?" Jake called, his voice cracking. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it began descending the stairs, each step sending an echoing groan through the house. The group stood frozen, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of its movements. It seemed to glide more than walk, its limbs bending at impossible angles. "We need to leave," Max hissed, grabbing Emily's arm. They bolted for the door, but when they pulled on it, it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself had trapped them. The scratching in the walls grew deafening, and the air became stiflingly hot. Jake turned to see the figure just a few feet away. Its face was a void, a blackness that seemed to suck in the light. It raised a skeletal hand, its fingers impossibly long, and reached for him. "Get away!" Emily screamed, swinging her flashlight. But the beam passed through the figure as if it wasn't there, and yet it still loomed closer. Desperate, the group scattered. Max and Sarah ran upstairs, hoping to find another way out, while Jake and Emily tried to force open the boarded-up windows in the living room. But the house wouldn't let them go. Upstairs, Max and Sarah found a child's bedroom, untouched by time. Toys were scattered across the floor, and a doll sat propped on the bed, its glassy eyes fixed on the door. A soft giggle echoed behind them. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, clutching Max's arm. Before he could answer, the door slammed shut, plunging the room into darkness. Downstairs, Jake and Emily felt the walls begin to warp, bulging inward as if the house was breathing. The floor beneath them cracked, and black tendrils began to slither up from the gaps, reaching for their legs. "Emily, run!" Jake shouted, but it was too late. The tendrils wrapped around his ankles, pulling him into the floor. His screams echoed through the house. But Emily could do nothing but watch in horror. By morning, Hollow Road was silent again. The house stood as it always had, but something had changed. The dinner table was set for 8 instead of 5, the plates spotless, and the candle in the window burned brightly. No one dared to enter the house again, but late at night, if you stood outside, you could hear faint whispers calling from within, desperate, pleading, and impossibly familiar.